And who we are, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about my own experience at Earlsfield Food Bank. So I ran Earlsfield Food Bank for about 4 years. I don't know if any of you know Earlsfield, it's in southwest London. And I joined IFAN about a year ago. I've been completely honest with you, the reason I left is I was completely kind of burnt out, and that's a big thing on our mind at the moment about volunteers, and that was mentioned in the previous presentation about just how tough things are, not just for the people who are struggling financially, but also people, you know, working on the front line. So yeah, now I work for IFAN, and I work in the whole area of policy, which I'll be talking to you about, and also supporting our members. So if you don't know IFAN, we're the Independent Food Aid Network. So we represent and advocate around 700 independent food aid organisations around the country. It was set up about 10 years ago, and it was basically because people recognised that alongside, you know, Trussell and the kind of bigger network of food banks, there were an increasing number of smaller independent food aid organisations that sometimes weren't even food banks. It might be a little group in a church, or it might be a pantry, and just because all these organisations are so small, they needed one bigger voice to represent and advocate for them. So that was why IFAN was founded. I'm going to talk a little bit about our vision. I've got a beautiful chart here which goes through the vision strategies you can't see. But the problem, you know, if we think about the problem that why we exist now that we're trying to face, is that there's growing poverty which is causing an institutionalisation of food banks. They're becoming the norm. They're becoming inbuilt to our, you know, into our society. People see them as a solution of poverty. When they first came about, they were only meant to be temporary. You know, and what's happening now is, you know, it's like putting a sticking plaster on a wound that's getting worse and worse and worse. And so we're just really worried about that, and we see that everywhere. You know, we see that supermarkets talk about food banks in their campaigns. You know, churches, schools, hospitals now have food banks. It's a really, really worrying situation. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve, really. Our vision is for a country where charitable food aid, you know, is not needed, and there's adequate, affordable food available to all, because really it's a human right. You know, it's much more, it's a human right. In other countries, in our country, it's recognised as a human right. People simply should have access to affordable, nutritious food. So our strategy, how are we trying to do that? We're trying to reduce food insecurity by promoting what we call a cash-first approach, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. And we do that, we kind of do that on 2 levels, by lobbying to the government, so on a national level, and then on a local level as well. Sorry, this is more difficult than I thought to do without slides, but hopefully it's making sense so far. So on a government level, what are we trying to do? We're trying to influence policy. So we're engaging with policymakers, we're engaging with elected representatives, we're trying to raise awareness through gathering data. So Sabine, my boss, does an amazing job collecting all the numbers, because all the numbers look small scale, but when you bring them all together, it's really important to show, you know, the increasing demand and the actual situation. And it's also about promoting the messaging to press and social media. So on this kind of pillar, this week I've just come back from the Labour Party conference, where I was just trying to meet as many people as possible, tell them about the real situation, because I think all of us volunteers, all of us, we're living it, we know how bad it is, but people are often surprised by that. And what I find also, what I try to talk to people about, is that people may see the numbers, and at Earlsfield Food Bank, you know, our numbers were kind of going up all the time, but it's not just the scale and the numbers, it's the depth of suffering and deprivation. You know, it's the scale of that hardship. And I remember when I first started at Earlsfield, you know, maybe every week we might have 1 or 2 households in absolute crisis. By the time I left, there were always 10, 11 households at that point of sheer, you know, facing destitution or facing a mental health crisis where things were really, really that desperate. So that's something that we're constantly trying to get across. It don't just think about the numbers, it's actually that level of suffering and deprivation that we need to change. So that's what we kind of do on a national level, but then on a local level we do a lot as well. So we're trying to influence policy, we're really trying to work with local authorities and things like the worrying about money leaflets, which I'll talk about in a minute. One of the things we're trying to do at the moment is also work more closely with mayors, because obviously mayors have more and more power, they have funds, and sometimes it's more easier to do things on that level rather than at a governmental level. We're trying to improve access to advice. I didn't catch all of it, but I just thought that was so fantastic, the presentation that I just saw about the brilliant work that CAT do, because really giving people that support and advice so they don't need a food bank, they don't need food aid, is really, really at the heart of what we're trying to do. You know, that's how you get to a country that doesn't have food banks. And then finally, the thing that we do is we support our members. We have monthly meetings, or we're trying to do more monthly, which Trevor usually attends, and then also any other issues that may crop up. What I used to find when I was at Earlsfield is often you're desperately trying to grapple with an issue, you don't have the time to deal with it, but through IFAN there'll always be someone else that has dealt with that. And Trevor just mentioned, you know, things that you need are changing all the time, you know, like data regulations are changing, or how you do a safeguarding policy. So we try and have that all centrally on our website so that, you know, really busy food aid organisations like yourself don't have to start from scratch all of the time. So that's a little bit about our strategy. One thing I talked about is food insecurity, and that's one thing we always talk about. When we look at the numbers, it's not just about food bank numbers, it's food insecurity, because they're much, much bigger. We know from DWP data that was released last year that only 1 in 6 people who are facing food insecurity will visit a food bank. You know, so the numbers are much, much bigger. For every person that comes through the doors and asks for help, there's another 5 at home that haven't sought help yet. And why is that? Well, it's because there's a lot of stigma involved. A lot of people, I remember at Earlsfield, our food bank was in a church, we had this lovely little garden, and we'd sometimes see people kind of hiding a little bit. You know, I remember once there was someone almost in a hedge, and the first week she wouldn't come in. It was too big a step, the thought that she was using the food bank. And then sometimes it's also a lack of knowledge. It's simply that you don't know where you can get support from. You don't know where your local food aid place is. So that's why it's really important that we always talk about it's food insecurity. It's not just food bank use, and that's why we always say it is just the tip of the iceberg. And it's funny. I mean, Trussell released a report recently looking their most recent numbers, and it's horrific. And people are saying it's 3.4 million food parcels, and it's like that's horrific, but it's so much more than that. One of the things I was at the Labour Party conference was actually a session with Stephen Timms, who's the Minister for Social Security. And one of the things which hopefully there'll be some movement on, but one of the policies they're talking about that needs to change is the 5-week wait for universal credit, because obviously when someone, that takes a long time. The average time before someone even applies for universal credit is 9 weeks, so that is 14 weeks. In that 14 weeks, a like small financial shock can become a massive crisis where your children aren't having dinner, or, so it's really, really worrying. The other thing that Stephen Timms talked about, which I thought was really interesting, is why on earth is it 5 weeks? In the 1940s, when Social Security benefits first came into place, obviously everything was done by post. You'd have to go and you'd fill in a form and then post it off. And you know how long it took then? It took 10 days to get from start to finish. And so here we are in the year 2025, and it takes that much longer. I mean, it's ridiculous. So yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about cash first now. That's our big thing, and this is how we believe we can end the need for food aid. What cash first is really, it's about income maximising. I often used to say when I was at Earlsfield that we're almost the opposite of a business. In any business you want numbers to grow, you want to be as big as possible, you want repeat business. I always say we want the opposite. We don't want, if we get repeat business, that's when things are going wrong. So it's really trying to make sure people don't need us again. I've got lots of infographics with these as well, so I'll share these around. I did mean to put them on chairs, but because of my Gatwick adventure, I didn't get to do that, but I'll share those around afterwards. So cash first, I believe is everyone here familiar with the Worrying About Money?
Yeah, we use those.
We
have our own.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
I won't talk much about those, but just obviously they're just such a good way of giving people the simple advice they need. Step-by-step guides. We used to find that people always used to say they used to appreciate knowing, have the right language around finance as well. Someone said they could take this home and speak to their partner about the issues they were having. So what we used to do in Earlsfield, as well as having them on site, we used to try and distribute them in as many different places in the local area as possible, like charity shops, pharmacies. And we always used to find also it's a really good way of giving volunteers confidence about talking about financial issues, because it's quite scary. There's so many things you can get it wrong. It's very sensitive. You're worried people can be hostile or difficult. So we just find these as just such a useful tool. And these really epitomise, I think, our cash first approach, because it's all about support and advice, and the methods in here will get more money in the pocket, will help maximise incomes. So I won't go into that in too much detail. Have you done the money counts training as well?
No, we haven't done that yet. I think all of our work like that is done with our client support volunteers, often in situ down at our food stop that Leo referred to down the road a bit. Do a one-to-one then, or we work in conjunction with CAP, so that's probably
okay, that's brilliant. But it is there, if ever people do want, we can do proper training on exactly how to use the leaflets as well. And the last thing I'd say about the leaflets also is it's just that giving people confidence that we are at food aid organisations, we're the first aid. We don't have to actually solve those problems ourselves. It's about signposting and referring, and I think that helps people as well, because sometimes you're worried about how can I solve this complex PIP issue or this debt issue, but it's not. It's about helping people identify and know where to go to support. So that's kind of generally the really quick introduction to IFAN. And now we're going to talk about something which developed at Earlsfield, which we now use across IFAN, which is called a 3-pillar framework, which is really a framework to help manage the complexity of running a food aid organisation on a daily basis. We developed this at Earlsfield because we just found it's increasingly difficult to manage the logistics of running a larger and more complex organisation. When I started, we were in a tiny corner of a church. We had about 25, 30 households a week. 4 or 5 years later, with 120, 130 people a week. So the scale of any business, you can imagine, going from there to there is really difficult. The things you have to think about, we had to have contracts with a waste system and things like that. Our deliveries became more complex and everything became more and more difficult. And you're having to do it kind of week after week after week. I always used to find one session would end and then immediately you're into planning the next one. There's no time to breathe and it's really, really difficult. And there's all of that practical stuff, which is really difficult, and the logistics and the, running quite a complex organisation. And then, my goodness, you have the emotional side as well. So the time and the emotional energy kind of dealing with some of the situations that we were faced with, really, really difficult crisis situations that we're untrained for. Didn't have in many other sectors, if you're a social worker or if you work in the health service, you will have supervision, you will have been trained in this area. Volunteers don't most of the time, and the other thing that's so tough is often you're doing these two things simultaneously. So a lot of us would arrive at the church for a session, 6:30 on a Thursday morning, spend 2 hours lugging boxes, getting deliveries, making sure the van's got somewhere to park, doing this exhausting physical work. Then 9:30 the doors open and people come in, and then you're sitting down with these really kind of quite tricky and complex emotional work. So we just found it so difficult. It's like, how can we do all of this at once? And then finally, the last thing we're really struggling with is also the bigger question of questioning the purpose. And I often used to think, obviously we'll do it, but are we making the situation worse? Is our very existence just making it easy for the government or the local authority? Does it enable, and even on a local level, does our existence make it easy for people to not think about poverty and what's happening on the doorstep? It's almost like, I'll donate a few tins, job done, I'll go off. And so that we used to really, really struggle with. And how do we make sure that we're not just perpetuating this system that we don't believe should be there? And so that's why we created the framework. So first of all, what the framework is about dividing all of that stuff into 3 simple pillars and then making sure we had the right resources around each one. So the first pillar is about managing the day-to-day. And what this is really about the short term. So, you know, the short-term goal of the immediate relief of poverty. So this was basically saying, okay, when people walk through our door on a Thursday morning, what can we do to make their life, their situation immediately better? So they walk out of the door in a better place. So the obvious thing there was food parcels. You know, someone comes in hungry, they haven't eaten, they come out with a food parcel and they can eat that evening. But it also led us to think about other things that we could do, some of which you may already do. We had the system with clothes vouchers. You know, there's a charity whereby you can issue vouchers for someone to take to a charity shop, because again, if someone comes in, they need clothes for an interview, or you know, the child hasn't had any new shoes for ages, and one's broken, whatever, that you can kind of fix that problem. We also used to give SIM cards. You know, Vodafone have that brilliant initiative, I can't remember the name, but if you don't know it, I can send you the link, where they give free SIM cards, which again, if someone's struggling, they've got their phone, but they can't log into their work journal, and they know that might be sanctioned, but straight away you can help them with that problem. So that was the kind of the first pillar, is everything that we could do to make sure that on that day someone walked away in a better situation. But as I said, for the reasons we talked about before, that isn't enough. So then we moved on to, okay, the second pillar, which is about the medium term. So what do we do when someone walks in to make sure that they don't come back again, to make sure that they walk out with some knowledge, with some understanding, so they can, you know, help solve some of the problems. And this pillar is really all about, you know, support and advice. So giving support and advice on site. So we were very lucky, we had citizens advice on site. We also had some mental health support on site, and then we also had some addiction advice on site as well. So just certain things we had on site, but then we also had our leaflets. And we'd also try and do some ad hoc things as well. We had a relationship with our local surgery, who once a quarter, they would come and they would do things like blood pressure, health checks, or whatever, because they really liked the fact that some difficult to reach groups, they could actually come to us. And it was amazing actually seeing that. We saw some people that had never had that level of knowledge, information, and suddenly they find out they've got high blood pressure, they can do something about it. So this is really about trying to help people with their problems. But that alone isn't, again, that won't do everything, because obviously you're just one food bank or food banks in the network, that's never going to be enough. So it's really also thinking about the long-term picture as well, which brings us onto the third pillar, which is what can we do to really fight at that level? You know, what can we do to really influence the people that make the decisions that can do those things? And this is really about campaigning. So, you know, how do we make sure we have time to campaign to end the need of food banks? And this is where actually, for me at Earlsfield, I got to know IFAN quite well, because I knew we couldn't do it on our own, but IFAN is an entity that actually does that has the resources. And so even when we were really busy, even things like just retweeting in the days when Twitter was big, which obviously isn't now, but retweeting IFAN's posts and taking some of the IFAN content and getting it out there. One of the things we have on our website is we have a template for political engagement, so people can just write to your MP and you can copy and paste, you know, this is what's happening, this shouldn't be happening, etc., etc. And then there are loads of other events and initiatives that take place. I have to say, when I talk to other food banks about this, I often sometimes talk about work you guys do, because you already do this, you know, you have a newsletter, you're very good at communicating, you'll talk about these things, so, you know. And then one of the brilliant things you did is you took part in the lobby day, and I've got a lovely picture of you here in the presentation from lobby day. For lobby day, for those of you who don't know, was a day organised by Trussell and a few other organisations in June, and it was really about getting food aid teams from around the country to get in touch with their MP and try and have a meeting with them in Westminster on one day. And it was an incredible day. Over 700 food aid teams from all of them, Scotland, Wales, everywhere, Northern Ireland, came to London. And over 250 MPs had meetings with them, which was just incredible. We never thought it would be that successful. I know you tried to get a meeting with your MP, but you didn't. And it was a wonderful day. It was a wonderful day of protest for us all to kind of have pictures and say, look, this is unsustainable. But it was also a really amazing day for hope. And it wasn't completely related, but you know, these things do make a difference. So the following week was the week when the welfare reform bill was voted down. Do you remember the big thing? Now, I don't think this was, of course, the only thing. It was a week before or whatever. But I have to say, I think that it probably did play some part. You know, some of the meetings with MPs probably had that in its mind, on their minds. These are all little things, but I think all of our voices matter, and every single piece of the jigsaw will add up and will make a difference. So it's really, really important to make sure we're kind of doing all of these things. When we put this framework together, one of the kind of big insights we realised was that it just can't be done by one person. Is that one, it's too much work, but also it's very kind of different types of roles, really, you know. And so it's quite interesting. When I moved on to IFAN, now Earlsfield had actually recruited according to those. So we've got someone that is a brilliant manager doing all of the logistics and can deal with all the deliveries and everything. And then a separate person that really works on support and advice, works with all the local agencies, referral partners, looks for new opportunities like GP surgery or whatever, or doing things like that. And then finally there's someone that on a very small level does campaigning that I work with on that as well, and works with IFAN. So it really helped us think about also things like, what do volunteers want to do? Because we had some volunteers that just, you know, love just packing food parcels, want to do that area, do it brilliantly, but other people that maybe had a background in support, and we thought, you know what, you'll be really good at sitting down and helping people with our leaflets. And then we also saw there's a couple of people that just seemed very interesting in the campaigning side, were very good on social media, so it's like, right, do us an Instagram page, start talking about this stuff. So it really became a model on which we could kind of, you know, look at the whole operation. So that's my presentation. I'm really sorry that I've just been talking and you couldn't see the slides, but I'll share a PDF afterwards, and I've got some infographics to share as well. Any questions?
Yeah.
Very impressive.
I think Nick Graves over sitting there, this wonderful. He runs the Old Lodge Lane food stop, and some of the things that I think you've been talking about happens down Old Lodge Lane. Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes well, probably sometimes not so well. But that sort of stuff that does go on, and we've got Julia Lee, who leads our client support volunteers, and couldn't be with us tonight, but she had a background in human resources, so she's quite good. She has those skills of getting alongside people when she can, and her own, you know, has the family issues and things at the time. But yeah, so those, yeah, using what skills people have got,
yes,
prepared to use,
yeah,
as well as highly valuing those who just want to come and pack.
Yeah.
You know, it's all part of a team, yeah.
And I think sometimes also different things on different days as well. Because
yeah,
some days you just want, you know, you want to pack, and that's really another day, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And we have a great sorting team on a Monday, very social occasion. They come in, and as part of that's grown into supporting those with some learning difficulties who come from a local college to give them working experience.
Yeah.
And that's something that Louise has developed, and you know, I believe the head of our management committee, and that's gone very well and very popular. No questions then? Oh, it must have been a very full day.
Yeah. Different food banks have different operational models. I'm thinking about the number of volunteers against the number of paid employees,
yeah,
part-time and so forth. As it happens, we're quite lucky, I understand, that we are all volunteers. But Earlsfield, for instance, do they have any paid part-time volunteers?
That happened halfway through my time, because it was just becoming, so I became a paid person because I was just working all the time. And it also enabled us to really think about what the job spec should be and how that should work. And actually it worked really well because it meant that when I left, we could replace a paid role rather than, you know, so I think it does give some more security to an organisation. But there's every food bank has different models, and that's one thing that IFAN will never say this should be the model, that because, you know, it depends on kind of capability or what's available. The other thing is in terms of funding, it's one of the things that you can, it can be quite, I wouldn't say easy, but there are several grants and funds that will be happy to pay for staff costs and things like that. So we got it directly from the council, the funding from the council, and then they were really happy because it's like, right, they knew who to work with and it was more formalised, so yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.